Hey, this is Peter Hamilton from Documentary Business, and welcome today to Dan Salerno. Dan is heading off to Marrakesh. That's where this year's World Congress of Science and Factual Producers is going to be held next week. And Dan is actively involved in programming, and I'm also a veteran of Congress. Can't do it this year after just coming back from MIPCOM, but we are going to explore the issues and questions that producers really need to be thinking about today as they contemplate the future of the documentary and unscripted economy. So welcome, Dan. Great to have you on board again.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Peter. I appreciate it. It's always enjoy the conversations. Looking forward to this one because I'm on a plane in a couple of weeks, as you said, to Marrakesh, and I know there's a real sort of buzz, pardon the pun there, a little bit for what we're going to find. I think I did the Science Congress last year for the first time in many, many years with sort of the new format under Paul Lewis's direction, and it was really a fantastic experience. It's a little different than kind of the markets, where it's sort of business, and the Congress really allows creative minds to sort of gather and talk. But on the tip of that, of course, is a pragmatic reality of the business environment, both here in the U.S. and globally, that we have to exist in. So I know it's kind of what you and I are going to talk a little bit about today.
All right, so let's put up our first slide, Dan. I just published in Documentary Business the latest version of the October 2024 Nielsen gauge, which shows how viewing is split between cable and satellite channels, streamers and broadcasters and other. And the comparison here is between 2021 on the left and October 2024 on the right. And the segment that we need to focus on really is the green and greeny blue segment on the lower left. And that's the share of traditional pay TV, cable and satellite channels of viewing. And you can see there's been a really steep decline. And on the other hand, looking at the blue, purpley blue segment on the right-hand side, the streamer's share of viewing is up by about 50%. So Dan, what does this mean for producers?
Well, I think it reinforces, and we can dig into this in so many different ways, and I know our time will be limited on it, but
yeah, let's devote 3 or 4 hours to this one. But
yeah, right. And if anybody's got to figure it out, is I'll buy stock in that company. Yeah, but it does offer a lot of clues, Peter, to the landscape that we've been facing, and you and I have been talking about it both formally in our webinar discussions and informally on a regular basis. There's a couple of things that stand out to me. The first thing before we get to the oh my gosh, the sky is falling part of the gauge there, I find it fascinating that the share, at least of that pie for broadcast, actually hasn't changed. Your instinct says that it would have dropped, but it hasn't changed, and great for broadcast.
that's because
Assuming
live sports is holding up the show, correct?
Yeah, it's definitely live sports, and it's there's definitely a shift in broadcast, and I know we're not going to talk a lot about broadcast today, but even something as simple as I made a note of it this year. There was a new drama series on ABC called High Potential that came out. Great drama series. I enjoy it. It premiered on, I think, a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. They reran the premiere on Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. And then they reran it again on Thursday night, and they reran it again on Saturday night. I think they gave it 3 additional airings on broadcast. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago, you never would have seen that happen. It would have aired once, and that was it. Broadcast is working really hard to narrow the focus on the volume of premieres and build up the exposure to those premieres as well. So that's a strategy they've had to employ, very cable-like if you think about it. But on the cable side, I think the part that is a little bit kind of makes you shake a little bit when you see it is what you pointed out. Cable's down significantly. Streaming is up significantly. Obviously, one is leading to the other. what the percentages here don't show you is the volume of viewing, the actual number of hours being viewed, more the percentage. Cable percentages have just dropped tremendously. And I don't think that's a shock. We've talked about it quite a bit, but what does it mean? It means that, when we start looking at some of the details that you and I have talked about and we track over the years substantively, the simple, pure volume of hours coming out of some of the big nonfiction brands here in the US, which largely drive the nonfiction production economy. They're coming down.
Discovery, Nat Geo, History.
A&E, ID is another big one. Food and HGTV on the lifestyle side are out there.
So they're all cutting back their hours. They're all cutting back hours, and then when they commission a series, they're reducing the number of episodes, right?
As much as like 20% in some instances. And I'm working off memory here, so apologies, but a few random stats that might kind of give you a little bit of a, oh my goodness. Discovery is not finished with announcing its year yet, so there still could be some new entries in the last 60 days. But roughly speaking, we're tracking them to be almost 20% down in volume of hours from I think 525, 550 hours. They'll probably hit about 450 hours this year. That's 100 hours coming out of the market. And it's not being replaced on the streaming side of the pie. Max's output or appetite for commissioning has not gone up by 100 hours. You see the same phenomena with TLC, with ID. So it's clearly a part of the contraction that we've heard with Warner Brothers Discovery. Interesting juxtaposition with that, we've talked about this, is National Geographic. Their volume of hours has actually stayed the same in 2024. In fact, it might even go up a little bit by the end of the year. However, they've pivoted heavily from full commissions at a premium level to participating as a pre-sale and co-production partner on many, many hours. This year, we're tracking roughly as many as 125 hours of co-production, which is a fantastic opportunity for producers if they can find partnerships.
That's a really great statistic, and that really leads us into the next question. You've really given us the answer. What are the channels doing to manage shrinking audiences and the need to maintain program quality with less revenues available from advertising and subscription fees to fund their production pipeline? What are they doing? They're looking for ways to share costs. It means co-productions and pre-buys and other solutions. I guess let's explore that too, but let's not also lose the thought that the networks are also more open to lower cost productions than they used to be available to. So let's come back to that one. I know we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. So I'm taking you in a circle, Dan.
That's okay.
Let's have a look at co-productions.
One of the things that we talked about, to plug one of our prior webinars, was one of the best, the most recent players in the co-production world, Big Media Television. So I would recommend, if you didn't get to see it yet, that anybody who hasn't, go back and check it out. It's a really interesting conversation. But to sort of extrapolate their business model to the industry as a whole and some of these other projects that we've just referred to, what Big Media did is what now a lot of companies are trying to figure out. How do I basically deliver the same volume of content, but at a lower price point? Because that's really what my buyers, my partners, my networks are asking for. Big Media has done a good job figuring it out. So have a lot of others. If I look at even most recently on Discovery, picked up a series that I checked out called Game Changers. That was an acquisition, paired up with, I'm trying to recall, I think it was paired up with Deadliest Catch, which is their longest running brand series. Now, all we got to do is go back a few years, and the notion that Discovery would pair with its highest profile series an acquisition, you never would have heard it. But clearly they're taking a slot that they probably spent heavy six figures on per hour, and they knock it down to an acquisition financially to delivering the same volume of hours to, hopefully, if the series works, they're keeping their viewers happy, but they've lowered their costs significantly Geographic has really done it. Like I said, I think they're in many ways leading the charge in this sort of linear to digital shift with the co-productions. Fantastic opportunities. In some cases, straight acquisitions. In some cases, they're partnering up very early. A lot of UK companies in there. People like Windfall has been very active coming out of the UK in that one, just to name one. I think they've got about 4 series, in fact, on Geo.
And I
But
want
yeah,
to
it's becoming more and more prominent in the US marketplace.
I want to jump in there on I just published in yesterday's post related to the Nielsen Gauge a list of high quality programs that were announced yesterday by Nat Geo. They were in traditional genres, history, science, in celebrity investigation. I mean, referring to a Diana show. What was interesting to me is that all of these episodes, all of these shows were created by British producers. Was I correct?
Yes, you are. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I don't know if you had Vegas odds if you could play a parlay that 4 out of 4 would come out of the UK. I'm not surprised by it in some ways. I mean, if you look at sort of where National Geographic has been working in the last, say, 18 to 24 months, you do see a pretty heavy lift of the originals coming out of the UK. Some of that is familiarity, I think. Some of that is partnerships and relationships. 72 Films has probably been one of the more prominent ones that kind of have of the franchise that they've been working on, the One Day. Started as One Day in America, and it's kind of broadened out to One Day In, which allows them to do the Diana series, Jonestown, properties that go beyond the shores of the U.S. Natural history, again, not a surprise. You would expect Bristol is the capital of natural history filmmaking, so not a surprise to see that. But yeah, they have definitely been mining the UK production landscape. They've got an office there, of course, that makes that work. I think what's more interesting to me, in addition to the UK focus, is also the partnerships themselves. These are really strong, well-established production companies.
They're not newbies. They're not newcomers at World Congress looking to pitch their new first project.
No, they're not. And if we were to look at other major U.S. services that are commissioning, you would see a similar pattern. It's coming back to back to that economic sort of base, right? If I'm running a network and I used to be able to buy 500 hours and I had a $300 million budget, okay, and I could spend healthily on, is that a word, healthy? Had a healthy spend on my programming, and shareholders and management come to me and say, sorry, 300 million is now going to be 150 million, but you got to keep going, you got to keep the goals up. They're going to probably kind of, they're going to circle the wagons a little bit. They're going to, the stakes are different. Maybe
they're going to come back
doing 100 projects, they can do 80. So they're going to be a little bit closer to home on who they're working with, the subject matters they choose, might not be as editorially risky in some instances. If we look at Geographic slate, and it's only because it came out yesterday that we can say this, we're happy to talk about the other networks. You see some very core subject matters in there that have been proven performers over the years. Diana, solar system, natural history. It's a really strong set of topics and stories with some fresh approaches and some very innovative ideas, but it's something that you're comfortable with. And I think we're seeing that with all of the US brands as they have to kind of narrow their lens in the commissioning.
And I'd like to add that there's biopsychology here. If you're spending 300 million, you can set aside 3 million for innovative new solutions from fresh producers. If you're spending 100 million and your overall business is in decline, you want to look after your job. So you migrate your decisions towards established producers and established topics. You're less open to risk. Am I?
Yeah, you really are. And I don't think that's a new phenomena. I mean, I've lived through several dips in the roller coaster of our lives in the media business. And when it's on the dip, you kind of come back to what you know. And then when you start to get a little bit stronger with your resources and you can take some risks, you expand. I want to emphasize it's heavily skewed right now towards the commercial broadcasters in this sense. Public broadcasters, particularly public broadcasters out of Europe, are where a lot of the innovation is really coming from. And to the degree that commercial networks in the US can pair up with them, and like we said, we're seeing that with National Geographic. PBS is a major co-production partner, has never really left the world of co-production.
Right.
You can see the innovation there.
I'm working on a co-production now, which is going into fine cut between a South African production company, Terramata Studios in Austria, and PBS Nature here in New York. So,
and it's a great, your project, by the way, is a great example of the co-production economy that can exist today, because you've got strong European partners, you've got a strong US public broadcaster in the mix. I would put Walking with Dinosaurs reboot between PBS and BBC as another one of those real sort of, not, I wouldn't say risky, but it's a significant investment into a concept, and you're probably going to take it up several notches over what we did 20 years ago, back in the day when you did these kinds of things. PBS is really, sort of investing in that, and I think that's fantastic. But you've got the BBC as the primary public broadcaster. If we look at some of the stuff that I've been involved with Science Congress, I'm seeing a great deal of innovation come out of France. And the broadcasters there, they're really doing some very neat shows. And I would also say even NHK in Japan. I've been talking lately with Billy out of China. There's some really neat stuff that they're doing that they've got permission, if you will, in sort of the scope of their business to maybe still play out on the edges of the territories that, right now the commercial broadcasters have to be a little bit more conservative with.
So Dan, the public broadcasters are probably under political threat from various populist regimes. However, they're well established. They do have long-term funding, and they now command a bigger share of the pipeline that they used to. The pipeline is shrinking, but their own production pipeline is relatively stable, and that applies to Germany, France, UK, maybe to a lesser extent, certainly to the States. Dan, we're kind of run out of time. We wanted to talk about AI and AI's importance, but I want to skip and see whether we have time to do that another day, because that's going to be a big topic. I want to wrap up with a subject that's really been that I've been giving a lot of thought to. When I went to MIPCOM, there was a big message that we've got to get beyond this tagline or this exhortation to survive till 25, and we've got to embrace new production models and new funding models, and everybody would reference the online funding, the streaming economy, the creative economy. My pushback to that is that producers who have spent their whole lives learning how to develop, pitch, and deliver programs for the BBC, for Discovery, for Nat Geo, for History, for ABC Australia, for that whole commissioning business, for them to shift over to the creator economy, where you have to develop a concept built around an influencer or an emerging star and get millions of views in order to be able to sustain the advertising, the shared advertising spend that funds the whole project in the first place. It's like a shift from the horse and buggy days to the Model T days in the automotive age. And I just think it's really hard for producers to get their mind around that. And I think we're spending too much time.
It's a discussion unto itself, but I will share that, in the work that I've been doing for our keynote session at Science Congress, and I won't spoil any of the sort of things we're going to present, but it is very much a sort of a paradigm shift in sort of structure and mindset that you have to go into it. And I think it challenges, call it legacy producers, call it established producers, but the producers that we've come to know and love over the last couple of decades, there are ones that are making that shift really well. They really are. And then there are ones that I think are trying to find it and figure it out. And if there's nothing that we haven't learned in our lives in this business, is that, you know, it's an evolving business, and those that adapt will find a way to adapt and survive. And the ones that struggle with it will find their own niche, or maybe they'll try some new things. And, you know, it challenges us, but it also brings really great new storytelling devices and innovation. I think one of the things it challenges us to do is to figure out how to communicate stories without that six-figure budget behind us. Right?
I remember I was in New York during the shift from broadcast. I worked at CBS to cable and satellite, and the broadcast producers of factual programs were used to $1 million plus budgets. This is back in the 80s. And they just absolutely laughed at the possibility of making, for instance, a clip show for $60,000 for the emerging A&E or history channels. And yet it was the producers who managed that shift who became, in so many cases, the senior executives of the emerging cable and satellite channels like History and Smithsonian and others. So,
well, and now if you think about that time, Peter, it's sort of like it's almost like the student has become the teacher, right? Because you know, in the last 20 years, the networks, the broadcast networks, with, you know, such kind of a bit of a dismissiveness to the cable platforms. One, they've got either bought by them or partnered with them, and they're all sort of integrated now anyway, economically as businesses. But also, you can look at any broadcast schedule, particularly in the US, and you can see the presence of reality television, factual television, nonfiction television. NBC is going to be airing a high-end premium blue chip series, America's Natural History, next I think February. It's coming in on Sunday nights in the classic sort of old school Wild World of Disney, you know, time slot, if you will. And it's really fascinating that they've sort of realized that the lower cost, relatively speaking, of this reality factual television. And I think in the same way, our cable networks, that while yes, they are challenged, but they are still raking in the cash from their economic models. They're now starting to take lessons from this digital economy and looking to the digital platforms for innovative ideas, talent, different ways to tell stories. So once again, the student is starting to help out the teacher.
Yeah, it's really, Dan, there's so much we can talk about. We're out of time today on this preview. I want to wish you a really successful trip to Marrakesh. Say hi to all our mutual friends and colleagues. And I can't wait till you get back, Dan, because we'll do a wrap up, your big takeaways. And I think Ruth Berry is going to join us.
Yeah. Our old friend Ruth is going to be there. We're hoping to spend some time. And I would encourage anybody who's checking us out right now, if you see me in Morocco, by all means, punch me in the shoulder and say hello.
Dan, safe travels, and so great to be with you again.
All right. Hey, thank you, Peter. Have a great day.
See ya.